All right, joining me now, our regular panel, Liberal advisor David Gazard, former Labor advisor Eamon Fitzpatrick. Thanks both for your time. It's all about inflation today. A sigh of relief, I'm tipping, Eamon, because you know very well that events, dear boy, events can actually determine what happens to governments, and Labor were thinking, God, 0.8, if this just stays a bit lower, we avoid recession. We're cooking with gas.
Look, I think there'll be a little bit of relief, but knowing the PM and the Treasurer and all of their colleagues, no one is a high five on the walls just yet. I think what we can see is this has been a pretty sustained action on their behalf to try and address some of those issues. Jim Chalmers has done something pretty decent, I think, in terms of wanting to bank the surplus that's coming up and just trying to keep pressure on those causes of inflation. So definitely there are a few things coming which they still need to manage. I think wages growth a test and how they continue to give cost of living relief, because, you know, as everyone acknowledges, people are doing it tough. We're not immune from those economic pressures here and abroad.
David, the obvious strategy from the coalition has been the one they've adopted, that is talk about the potential tough times ahead and try to talk about the extent to which Labor would be responsible for inflation. If it does get tamed, perhaps a bit easier than we were expecting, does it get a bit tricky of sort of where to next with the Liberal Party?
Well, I don't think it has been easy, Tom, at all. And you've seen the enormous personal cost that the former RBA governor has borne. And it very much looks like the strategies he put in place to get on top of inflation have worked. So it has been monetary policy that has driven inflation lower. And if I was Michelle Bullock, the incoming governor, I would be making it very clear I won't be jawboned by the government into softening a stance on inflation, because, as we all know, inflation is set over a 3-year horizon. So the government is looking, or the bank is looking at what is occurring likely in 3 years' time as it sets rates now. So it will be closely examining wages growth and what is happening in industrial relations right now in terms of how it's going to respond in terms of inflation. That said, it is good to see inflation coming down. I think people will be breathing a bit easier, but it would be a mistake to have a loose fiscal policy running now in the expectation that we're through the woods.
And just to clarify, I'm not saying it's easy for people, but easier than perhaps it looked a couple of months ago. The soft landing, I guess, or softer, avoiding a recession or maybe having a sort of minimal one, that's the best hope for Australia right now for the economy. If that's achieved, David, I get what you're saying about the economy there, and you note at the end that you hope, things are not too bad from here, but that does make it harder from a Liberal strategy, wouldn't you think? That if Labor manages to land the plane, albeit with a few bumps on the runway, that it's hard to say to voters you're going terribly at the next election?
The key will be the core measures of inflation, Tom, and they are wages, they are things like groceries, they are things like energy. And from what most of us can see at the moment, none of those look like they're moderating. It's things around the circle or around the outside of the circle that are taking the pressure off at the moment. But don't forget, the inflation band that is acceptable to the RBA is within a 2 to 3% range. We're still at 6. That's double the outside marker. So there is no relenting on inflation, and I think credit to Phil Lowe for doing the heavy lifting thus far, because he looks like he's jumped on it and he suffered vilification for doing it.
So, Eamon, I guess the interesting thing that when David was talking about the core elements of there, the reason they matter is they're what people keep a closest eye on, they're what people pay. Is the danger for Labor, the one big thing they have clear responsibility on right now is power prices. And this transition to renewables is not going to be easy. And whatever happens from here on in with power prices, people are going to say, well, this is your plan on this, federal Labor, and it's your fault if prices go up, which they easily could, especially in the short and medium term.
Well, Tom, I think whether it's power prices or anything else, there's no room for complacency. This is a treasurer who has made that very, very clear. There's no doubt about it. the cost of energy is a huge factor. I think we've seen some relief so far, and I think that's to be welcomed. But that will be a priority for this Prime Minister and his government to make sure that that does not get away from them in the next couple of years, for sure.
Something a bit different, a lot of talk around whether Anthony Albanese will go to China or not. What do you think, David? Does he have to have sanctions lifted, and also the two, I guess, the highest profile Australians being detained in China at the moment? We've got a journalist and a writer being detained. Does that all have to be resolved before he goes, or is that unrealistic?
That's been our position thus far, and to his credit, the Prime Minister has resisted calls on going up there too early and being used as a pawn in this. I think there has to be very, very clear signs from China, and it's been demonstrated on a daily basis that China probably has pulled the reins too hard, and their economy is drastically slowing down, and they've made mistakes on boycotting various products in Australia. If I was the PM, I'd be sticking to the script, following what has been clear advice from our security agencies, and holding the line on a visit until there are clear signs that those embargoes are going to be lifted. I mean, he leaves himself in a position, if he goes, to say, well, we did get some relaxation on coal, but I decided to go before the embargo on wine or lobster or timber or barley were lifted. And I think it's important for those sectors that they understand the country's still swinging for them.
What do you think, Eamon? There's, some, even though overall we had this interesting story on our economy, hasn't really been buffeted, but sectors have. Wine was one mentioned there. Could the PM, subtly, not publicly turn down or delay an invitation to go over?
Well, I think he's been pretty upfront. He and Penny Wong have been very, very upfront about how the relationship has to progress and how it has to recover. Some of those sectors, trade, that is a big one. We'll know in August what the next step is on barley, and that is a key decision that we are waiting on. Let's see if there's some movement on barley. Wine also, I can see people in the wine industry hopeful that if they get it right on barley, wine will follow soon after. One of the things that did happen as a result of that is we've been able to diversify, which is a fantastic thing, and I think not before time. But having said that, we still have, for example, the wine industry. I don't think they'll ever replace that volume that they had previously, and I think they're very much keen to get back there. But let's just see how it goes. I mean, notwithstanding that, it is the 50th anniversary this year of Gough Whitlam's visit as PM, but I can't see Anthony Albanese being swayed by that in any way. He's always put the national interest first, and I don't think that'll change.
All right, I was going to ask you about the Ashes. We ran out of time. We might talk once it's all run and done, and maybe we'll have some more controversy to talk about. Eamon, David, thank you. Talk again next week.